Okay, cool. All right, Claire Lehmann, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Melody.
All right, so you created an online magazine called Quillette,
Yep.
which is known for critiquing some of the mainstream cultural ideas. Can you tell me what compelled you to create a journal like that?
Yeah, so it was a while ago, nearly 10 years ago now, when I created Quillette. And I actually did it the day after I had dropped out of my master's degree in psychology. And I already had a blog and I had written a couple of times for the Sydney Morning Herald, but I was really aware of a gap in the market, in the media market for long-form analytical commentary on issues around gender, any kind of sociological issue. So during my psychology education, you learn that any sociological issue is complicated. There are always multiple variables. You know, when Jordan Peterson talks about multifactorial, or, there's never just one variable that causes a sociological outcome. But a lot of stuff in the media talks about issues as if it's talked about issues in a one-dimensional way. Like there are less women in who are CEOs of corporations because of sexism. Like there's one thing that causes a disparity, and it's just so simplistic and so wrong that there was just a clear gap in the media, and I thought, well, I aim to fill that, and I did.
So if there isn't one cause, if you can just maybe give me an example. So what was it? There are less women in, say, corporate jobs. Like if that's not due to sexism, like what are the other variables?
Well, that's an easy problem to look at. So gender gaps is there are way more complicated issues, but say gender gaps in the number of women on boards or CEOs, or the number of women founding companies, and so on and so forth. There could be a range of different reasons why there's fewer women doing those jobs than men, such as women might prioritize family or having children over working long hours where you get promoted. Women might have a different risk appetite to men. So like founding a company, for example, is a very risky thing to do. And women in general are known to have a not as high a risk appetite as men. Sexism could be one variable, but it would just be one variable among many. And so you would need to take into account personality factors, environmental factors, how much support the woman has at home. Does she have a supportive partner? How many children she has, whether she wants to have children in the future, her personal preferences and interests, so on and so forth. So you have to take into account a range of different things.
It seems reasonable to do that.
Yeah.
To look at all the variables.
Yeah.
My question is, why does the modern culture not do that? Like I hear the narrative all the time. There's not 50-50 women because of sexism.
Yeah.
Why is that sort of a mainstream narrative as opposed to looking at everything?
That's a really good question, and I would like to know the answer to that. I really would. If you was taking a course in, say, psychology, and you were to explain some kind of behavioral outcome as just being caused by one thing, you would just fail. So I don't know why this simplistic analytical framework has caught on. I think, probably it's because it sells. It sells newspapers, it sells magazines. It's easy to get a simplistic message across. It sticks in people's minds. That's the best explanation I can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that sort of brings me on to this idea of the collapse of the sort of mainstream media and why people are looking sort of outside to online gurus or journals like Quillette. How did this happen? How did the mainstream just collapse?
Sort of implode. Yeah. Well, I think the explanation that there was, the mainstream media have lied and all of that kind of thing goes a little bit too far. And some people go too far with that kind of narrative. I really just think it's the result of technological disruption. So newspapers as we know them were a creation of the pre-internet period, when big companies like News Corp had what's called a monopoly on distribution. So they had a lot of money and they had access to printing presses, and they could be the only company that serves a geographical region, such as like Australia, or a city like Melbourne or Sydney. And so a new player cannot come along and compete with that. Like, I can't just slap $20 million down on the table and say, I want a printing press and I want to print newspapers and distribute them all over Sydney. But what the internet has done is that it's opened up distribution to everybody. It's democratized distribution. And so anyone can come along, create a website. I bought Quillette.com, the domain name, for $20. Didn't cost me $20 million. So there's just a different barrier to entry. And so we've got all of these new players in the market. And it just means that what made the older traditional publications so powerful, which was their monopoly on distribution, no longer really works anymore. And they're struggling to compete with all of the new voices.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think, how do I know who to trust?
Yeah.
How do I know I'm not stuck in some echo chamber online with all these overblown opinions?
Yeah.
Like, how can we...
I think trust is built over time. And so Quillette's strategy is to build trust in our audience over a very long time frame. So we're thinking like 20 years. We're not thinking about next month or the end of the year. And so you take your audience with you on a long-term journey, like a long-term relationship. Just like if you think of a relationship with an individual, you can't build trust overnight. It's a long-term project. So I think the trust will come back to institutions. It will just take a while for those new institutions to build from the ground up. And that's actually what we're trying to do with Quillette.
Well, would you also say you guys don't really have like advertising on your website?
We have very minimal advertising, yeah. So that's part of building trust. People trust that we are in the game for the right reasons. We're not there to just rip people off. We're not there to just monetize eyeballs. We're there because we want to tell good stories. We want to publish good journalism. And, readers can sense that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I said before you criticize mainstream cultural ideas. I want to get more specific on your opinion. What would you say what are some of the bad ideas permeating our culture today, in your opinion?
Well, I'm certainly not the only one or the first person to criticize some bad ideas that are popular at the moment. There's a lot of people who are critical of some of these simplistic narratives around social justice, which sort of flatten reality into two groups. You're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. So, I mean, if I'm to narrow it down, I would say that kind of Marxist framework. So it comes from Marxism, this class framework where you're either the bourgeoisie or the proletariat. So you take that simple binary framework and you can apply it to all sorts of problems. So you're either racist or anti-racist, you're either feminist or anti-feminist, you're either pro-trans rights or transphobic. Like, it's a way of making sure there's no middle ground, there's no neutrality. And that Marxist framework is applied to all sorts of social problems, and it's toxic and it creates tribalism. And, it's a repudiation of the ideas that became popular in Western civilization prior to this framework catching on, these ideas of the individual and freedom, and sort of everyone has their own, their own individual identity. We don't necessarily belong to a group. And also the idea that we don't actually have to have a position. You know, I'm a big fan of neutrality, of being apolitical and saying, like, actually, I don't have an opinion on this topic. Like, it's not for me. I'm a huge fan of that. And I worry that this, you know, a lot of these social justice issues force people into positions where they have to choose one or the other. And I see that as a huge problem.
I can see why, like, in a sense, we sort of need to be radical to progress society forward. I suppose my question is, how do we know when it's gone too far? And if I can just, maybe an example is if you think about the feminist movement and women having the right to vote, that would have seemed crazy at that time, right?
Yeah.
That would have seemed too far. But we look back on that and we're like, it seems crazy not to give women the vote.
Yeah.
So how do we know where we've peaked, essentially?
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not against activism, and I'm not against people having, being passionate about ideas or passionate about political causes. So Jonathan Haidt, for example, he's a social psychologist, but he's working on a new campaign to get rid of phones from childhood. He thinks that phones are really bad for kids and teenagers in particular and their mental health. And so he's on a campaign to get rid of phones, just like activists in the past got seatbelts for cars or got rid of lead out of paint and got rid of lead out of petrol. Like, there's all sorts of activism that has made the world safer and that has driven progress. So I certainly don't think all activists are crazy and that all activism is toxic. I just think the activism that is predicated on demonizing your outgroup as like evil, and you have to smash the outgroup because they're evil oppressors, I think that's what is toxic, because it leads to tribalism and it leads to hate and conflict.
Can you give me an example of that? What do you mean?
Well, there's lots of examples. Where do you want me to start?
What one do you think is elevated today or overblown?
You know, take Holly Lawford Smith. She's an academic at the University of Melbourne who is critical of trans activism. And she thinks that to be a woman, you need to be biological female. She's what people call a TERF. Now, I don't agree that, even if you disagree with TERFs or the feminists who have certain views on biological sex, I don't agree that these women should lose their jobs, should have their offices vandalized, or have stickers posted up around their workplaces saying that they're fascists and no one should take their courses. Kathleen Stock, for example, has, like, you know, she left her job at her university in the UK. J.K. Rowling receives death threats and rape threats constantly on social media. So in that situation, I don't agree that tactics of intimidation, tactics of violence, threats, and any kind of incitement to harm or violence is like a legitimate form of activism. And the framework that says that anyone that doesn't get on board with every single thing that trans activists think is the correct form of activists are automatically evil. I think that framework is toxic and doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree about women receiving like threats of violence. I suppose the counter argument would be people are being held accountable for vilifying a marginalized group. What would you say to that argument?
Well, I think being held accountable is doing a lot of work there. So what does being held accountable mean?
Well, I mean, transgender people are marginalized in society. We should be uplifting them.
Does that mean that we can't have a debate over what it means to be transgender, what it means to be a woman, what biological sex means as a category, whether women should have access to single-sex spaces, including toilets and change rooms. Does that mean that all of those issues are off the table and we can't discuss them or debate them?
I suppose with that argument, it depends who's saying what. Because some women will say they're promoting what you just said, but then they'll be like, men are not women, which I guess is true, but they're talking about transgender women. I don't think that's helpful, especially since trans people just have a pretty hard time in our society. Should they be held accountable for saying that?
I just disagree with taking issues off the table for discussion.
Okay.
So if you come from a classical liberal framework, just about everything is up for discussion and emotions and feelings are sort of irrelevant. So any philosophical issue should be open for discussion. I mean, you can say something that hurts my feelings, but I'm not going to try and get you to make you lose your job. And that's how we used to operate in society. We used to be able to take offense. We used to be able to separate out this idea that there are ideas that we can debate and discuss, and then we can get over conflict as individuals. But we've sort of conflated our identity with ideas, and so now suddenly we can't talk about ideas in case it upsets people.
So even though they're marginalized, we should be able to criticize maybe not them as people, but some of the ideas where there's a conflict between women's rights and trans rights.
Yeah. And I would even query how the claim that they're marginalized. I would want to see some evidence for that.
Well, surely without evidence, you could look at a transgender person or maybe a gay person or a person of color and sort of agree they might have a harder time in society than you? No?
Well, do I have a harder time in society because I'm female?
Okay, you caught me now. Is this again where I'm looking at these groups as opposed to all the other variables?
Yeah.
Okay, I suppose it would depend. I mean, I'm a gay person, but I don't particularly have a hard time in society. But there might be another gay person who feels like they have a harder time in society. I mean, but is that all just victimhood? Like, do they have a case?
I think I prefer to look at people as individuals. So I'm a female, and a lot of people believe that women are a marginalized group. I'm not marginalized. No one's marginalizing me, and if they do, there's some consequences, right?
But with the feminist movement that you are sort of, I mean, I suppose we'll get into that.
Yeah.
They're trying to uplift you. Okay.
The feminists in the past did a lot of work to get me to where I am grateful for the feminists in the past. If it weren't for feminists in the past, I wouldn't be able to run my own business. I wouldn't be able to even have a job. I am hugely respectful and in huge gratitude to feminists of the past, first and second wave. Feminists today aren't doing anything for me at all, except that maybe the feminists who are protecting women's only spaces.
Whoa. Okay, so why don't we get more of a specific characterization of what you believe the feminist movement today is doing?
I guess who is a feminist, right? The big name feminists. Who's a big name feminist that I should be looking up to today, in your view?
Clementine Ford.
Yeah, so she's doing nothing for me as a woman. I would say she's actually harming the interests of women.
How?
Her last book that she published was called I Don't, and is the case for women divorcing their husbands. And to me, that's absolutely nuts. Like, someone should not be, like, I trained as a psychologist. If you have a client come in, you don't sit them down and tell them to make major changes in their life, such as getting a divorce. You don't know anything about that person's life and their situation. And so she's out there telling women to leave their partners as if she's some kind of authority figure, when all of the statistics show that children are better off in two-parent families. Women are happier in married women, and married men are happier when compared to single men and single women. Like, it's crazy. It's totally divorced from the evidence, and I just think it's she promotes a toxic worldview.
So, I mean, a lot of, again, I don't know specific feminists, but a lot of young people believe in, there should be 50-50 women and men in the workplace. I mean, in their view, that's to sort of uplift, get more women, make everything more equal. How is that not a good idea?
Well, people have different talents and different preferences. So you basically can't force people into jobs that they don't want to do. So I take my daughter down to a school down the road. It's a kindergarten to year 2 preparatory school. Most of the teachers, I think all of the teachers there are female. I think every single teacher there is female. I think there was one male teacher, but he left a couple of years ago. Now, do we have to force men to become kindy teachers, even if they don't want to become kindy teachers, to create a more equal world?
Well, the problem with that argument is it's more like women in parliament and women in positions of power. That's where people feel like there's a lack of women. It's not so much like kindergarten and McDonald's employees or whatever. Like it's these important positions that make decisions and influence policy for the society.
Why isn't kindergarten important?
It is important, but it's not influencing the culture. Like, if there's more men in parliament than women, can you see how that's different?
I think it's different from a male perspective, from a male centric perspective. So I think one of the bad ideas we have in our culture is that we don't value the work that women do. So why don't feminists celebrate and promote care work more if women are doing that work more than men? Like, why aren't kindergarten teachers given more prestige? Why aren't they paid as much as computer programs? When I used to drop my kids off they used to go to family daycare, the woman who used to take them and look after them allowed me to go to work and build a company. Like, I could never be a kindergarten teacher, right? Yeah. But I used to be so grateful every day because she did the best. She was such a beautiful carer. She was so nurturing. The kids loved her. And, our society and our economy cannot work without women like that doing that care work. It's the backbone of society. And so we shouldn't be comparing them to McDonald's workers, and they should be paid more, and we should be valuing the work that women are actually doing rather than bemoaning the fact that we're not shoehorning more women into male-dominated or male-centric industries.
Okay, this is something we agree on. So women teachers, kindergarten teachers, should be paid more.
Yeah.
For the work that they do, because it is valuable.
And should be offered more prestige.
Okay. Well, I would argue the feminist movement is looking at that.
Yeah.
A little bit. Okay, so there's probably a few things. You're not like, What do you think we could just do away with it altogether, the feminist movement?
There's different types of feminism.
Yeah.
So a type of feminism that I find appealing is called care feminism.
Okay.
And that is not as hostile to the notion that there are so a lot of orthodox or mainstream feminism is hostile to the notion that men and women have differences. So I actually subscribe to the notion that there's quite a few differences between men and women on average. Care feminism is not as hostile towards sex differences as mainstream feminism, and recognizes the care work that women do, including parenting and including being stay-at-home mums, and advocates for women who choose caring over other forms of work, such as paid work, and seeks to elevate those women. And I think that's a great form of feminism.
What are some sex differences that are between men and women that the feminist movement misses out today?
A big one is preferences. So in a free country, people often choose jobs that they have a natural inclination or a natural interest in. So you couldn't pay me enough money to go and do chemical engineering, right? I'm not interested in chemical engineering, but I am interested in people. And so I went and studied psychology. So psychologists find that one of the most robust sex differences is that women are interested in people and men are interested in things. And so if you break that down by occupation, you'll get more women in medicine, psychology, childcare, teaching, nursing, even vet science, because animals are a bit like people, I guess, sometimes. And then you get more men in engineering, computer programming, anything that doesn't involve people. So you get gender disparities in what people study and then what occupations they go into. So that's a big one. There's other sex differences to do with, who we find attractive, what we look for in a partner, our parenting, how we parent. Women tend to be much more attuned to infants in the early years. Men get more involved in the later years. So there's lots of sex differences. Personality is another one. Women tend to be more agreeable than average than men. I'm actually disagreeable, I have more of the male type personality.
Me too.
Cool. And so, when I say sex differences, I'm talking about on average. So you'll get within the distribution, you'll get women who are more disagreeable than the average man, but that doesn't negate the averages for each sex. So there's a spread, and you'll get a lot of variation in the spread of each trait, and there'll be a lot of overlap. Like, just a good way of looking at it is height. So on average, men are taller than women, but that doesn't mean that we don't get really tall women and really short men. They're just outliers. But when we look at averages, men are taller than women. So you get that in a lot of traits, personality traits, preferences. Intelligence is equal on the average, but there is a slighter, there's a flatter spread for men when it comes to intelligence. So you get more at the tails for the low tails and the high tails.
Okay, but it's mainly equal.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of people that, like, people would use the idea. I mean, I'm trying to understand now why so many people are social constructionists, because I can see that these people use this idea of sex differences to say, oh, woman can't do this because, this is a man's job.
Yeah.
See where the social constructionist movement has come from.
Yeah. I do too. I definitely do too. Because I don't have, because I'm sort of an outlier myself, like I'm not a terribly nurturing woman. And so if you were to look at the averages, and if I had to be pegged into a box according to averages, I wouldn't be able to do what I want to do, right? Because on average, women don't go out and found companies, and women aren't as interested in men as politics, and don't do risk taking and stuff like that. But it's like, I want to do all those things. So I really appreciate having the freedom to do whatever I want. And I'm grateful for the feminist movement because of that. At the same time, the average still exists. And, we can't socially engineer society and forget that, human nature is a thing. And there's always, people are always going to revert back to doing what they actually want to do in a free society. And so if more women want to go into people-focused fields and not into finance and not into computer coding, that should be okay. And we shouldn't be wringing our hands over it, thinking that it's because of sexism.
All right. I'd like to move on now to your criticism of the Me Too movement.
Okay.
I'm interested in why you, maybe we can talk like what you see the Me Too movement as.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think when it started, to be honest, I don't have very strong opinions on the Me Too movement. And when it started, it was over Harvey Weinstein, who, seemed, by all accounts, is one of the worst sexual predators to have been exposed in Hollywood, or to have been exposed in a long time in sort of any kind of elite sphere. I guess Jeffrey Epstein is another one, but it was certainly a legitimate movement in response to those heinous crimes that Harvey Weinstein committed. But it quickly snowballed into this thing where crimes, the category of what counted as a sexual assault kept expanding and expanding, and we were getting these sort of stories about bad dates. I mean, this was years ago now, but we were getting stories of bad dates and uncomfortable flirtations, and it's like, come on, man, that's not quite the same as what Harvey Weinstein did.
I would agree, but I would push back and argue why is it bad to expand the definition of sexual assault to include unwanted advances? Because, I mean, men are finally being held accountable, right? Like, obviously there's violent rape, and then there are, they're being held accountable for things that were sort of normal 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like sexual advances in the workplace and stuff. Why not expand it?
Yeah, so the problem with moral panics is that innocent people get caught up in them.
Okay.
And so we saw that Kevin Spacey, for example, was accused of sexual assault by men, not women. And so he had his name trashed in the media. He had to spend, I don't know how much money on lawyers defending himself, and he won. He wasn't convicted of any sexual crimes. And but his career will be permanently damaged. He will have lost millions of dollars in potential earnings. For what? Because, some people got together and concocted, who knows what they maybe Kevin Spacey did something, but it didn't reach the threshold of him having a conviction. And I actually think it's bad when innocent people are not only convicted of crimes they didn't actually do, but are subjected to trial by media or trial by gossip networks. Like, actually strongly believe in due process, and that if someone is accused of doing something heinous like sexual assault, they actually have rights themselves. And, we should respect, fundamental principles such as the presumption of innocence. So that's, the Me Too movement steamrolled all over the principles that we've developed over hundreds of years for protecting the rights of people accused of crimes. And those rights don't just protect men, they protect women.
But the examples, like, obviously to be like falsely accused is wrong, but it must be so minimal in comparison to all the men that are now being held accountable, wouldn't you say?
I would query that, actually. Right. Yeah, I mean, if someone can do a study and say these are all of the people who were accused and who were innocent, and these were all of the people who were accused and who were guilty, that would be a piece of evidence I'd be willing to look at. But if you think about it, what's the price we're willing to pay for an innocent person having their life ruined? Like, how many people, like, if you look at the death penalty in the United States, like, the reason why they should get rid of the death penalty is because every now and then they execute someone innocent, right? And isn't being progressive about protecting people who are innocent?
You'd think so. But I mean, you want to study, it's probably impossible to get a study like that, right?
Oh, yeah, but we know that innocent people who have been executed in the United States under the death penalty. And that's the main reason why countries like Australia don't have the death penalty, because it's so heinous to kill someone or convict someone or punish someone who is actually innocent, and you never really know. And so that's why we don't have the death penalty, because we see it as barbaric. Similarly, it's barbaric to accuse people of serious crimes without giving them due process. So it's barbaric to have rumors spread about people and aired in the media without them being given a chance to defend themselves and present their side of the case and present their contrary evidence.
So the Me Too movement's good in terms of holding people accountable. It's when we don't give people due process is sort of what I'm hearing from you, or when it stretches out too far.
Look, I think in general, crimes should be dealt with by the judicial system. Yeah, so I mean, the Me Too movement was good in terms of drawing attention to Harvey Weinstein's crimes, perhaps, but to the extent that it promoted trial by media as like a legitimate avenue for complaint, I don't think it was good at all.
Well, all these women coming forward was not a good.
Well, it depends. It really depends.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
In saying that, I sort of want to ask you something a bit controversial.
Yeah.
If that's all right.
Sure.
Do you believe women have a role to play in protecting themselves against rape?
Yeah, just like we have a role in not, being hit by a car when we cross the road. Like our personal safety is important. And yeah, like I think that the main difference that I would have with some activists is I think that rape can never be completely eliminated, and that there's always going to be psychopaths and there's always going to be monsters out there. So we should be sensible about the risks we take. That being said, when a rape is committed, it is 100% the moral culpability of the offender. And there's never any provocation and there's never any excuse for doing that. Just like there's never any excuse for murdering someone.
You published a couple of articles in Quillette recently. Well, one article where the writer believes women should take personal responsibility for their actions to protect themselves. I'm just wondering, like what does that look like for you?
Personal. So, like when I was younger, I used to walk home from the pub at night in the dark. And you know what? To be honest, I probably still do that because Australia's a really safe place, and I'm actually not afraid of random attacks. But I wouldn't advise my daughter to walk alone at night after a night out drinking. Basically, like, my own, like I'm willing to take risks myself, but when it comes to someone I care about, I would hope that they're more sensible in their choices than I was when I was younger, and I am probably still today.
I worry about the focus on, if we just extrapolate that out now to just crime, like this idea of you're big on this idea of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? I worry that if we put too much of an emphasis on personal responsibility, it's sort of an impediment to changing societal structures. Like a counter argument would be like, well, we shouldn't have to live in a world where men rape women. Is that just wishful thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. Rape isn't caused by societal structures.
What's it caused by?
It's caused by a certain percentage of men being criminals and being sexual criminals and motivated to coerce women into having sex with them, basically.
Okay.
And unless we identify those men and breed that out of them, we're always going to have rapists amongst us.
And murderers.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on from that. Why do you think people call Quillette and you right-wing?
Well, we challenge a lot of left-wing dogmas. And so, we're set, I would categorize us as small L liberal or centrist because we're not conservative in any kind of traditional way. But classical liberalism is coded right-wing these days.
Is it?
Yeah.
How so?
Sure. Well, the idea of personal responsibility, the idea of individualism.
Freedom of speech?
Yeah, even the idea of due process is coded as being right-wing. It didn't always used to be that way. These being pro-individualism, free speech, due process, these would have had you coded left-wing back in the 90s, but right-wing today. So
that's that whole idea of the Overton window.
Yeah.
sort of shifting.
Yeah.
Would you also say it's like relative? I mean, I would say I'm very left-wing when I'm with my family.
Yeah.
But I'm very right-wing when I'm with my friend. And it's hard to explain that to people. With some of my theatre friends, my quote-unquote woke theatre friends. Yeah, it's hard to really explain.
Yeah.
Sort of where you sit.
Yeah, and I, like, among American conservatives, I'm woke. No, Quillette, we are called crypto woke by people like James Lindsay, right? Because we're pro-vaccine. I don't know what other positions we've taken that. Oh, we've criticized Tucker Carlson and we criticized Trump, right? So we're crypto woke, if not just woke, to a lot of American conservatives.
Crypto woke, what is that?
Like woke in disguise.
Man, that's hilarious. Nah, you guys are. I mean, I would just, I would categorize you as more of like a liberal. Yeah, you elevate individualism.
Yeah.
And you believe it's more important to look at people, I mean, you said before, as individuals as opposed to group identity. Yeah. Why is that?
Okay, because I think groups, looking at group categories, it can be informative up to a point. So it might be informative for me to know that you're, like, just looking at you, you're a woman. Like, I wouldn't know that you're gay unless you told me. But you're young, like, I can see things about you that give me some information. But to really know who you are, I need to get to know you as an individual, which means getting to know the things about you that are different from other members of your group. So if I look at you as just some avatar of a group, then I miss the real you. Like, I don't know you as as who you really are. And so I think we miss something beautiful and important about all of us as human beings when we just see each other as representatives of groups. Like, I want people to see things about me that make me unique, not the same as every other woman, right? And so I think we miss a lot of what's beautiful about each other if we just see each other as members of groups.
How do we do that in our sort of polarized culture where we are online and we are just looking at each other and we are tribal? How do we detribalize?
Yeah, well, good art is one of the best ways to do that. So good art will go into explore the humanity of a character and all of the different dimensions of a person's life and who they are and the complexities. So, like, a lot of people hold contradictions, right? They have one side of their character is this way, another side is that way. And that's fascinating. That's what's so cool about humans, right? We're all complicated, and good art, whether it's, a novel or film, poetry, even comedy, will capture that. So I think, one of the things we can do is consume more good art that's not just political. Like, art that's political is just propaganda, basically. But art that actually delves into human psychology and the complexities of how we relate to each other and so on. And there's a lot of good films out there. I say go out and read books and think more deeply about what makes each of us different from our group category, not what makes us the same, because ultimately that's really boring.
It's difficult though, because we're forming communities based on political views.
Yeah,
I see this happen all the time. Like, if you don't have the same political views as me, then delete me as a friend.
That's really sad, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I suppose the argument there is like, oh, it's just a different political view. And then the counter argument will be like, well, your political view is rooted in my oppression, so why would I associate with that person? But that's quite often not true.
You know what? I think it's a generational thing. So I'm 38 and I've got heaps of friends who have different political views to me. Well, not heaps, but, a few. I don't have much of a social life. And it's not an issue. And as long as you can connect over some jokes or having a few drinks together and a bit of, like, people watching, and you can have fun together, politics really shouldn't matter. But that's my generation. And what is sad to me is that like younger people in their 20s or younger are losing that ability to be mates with people with different political views. And I see that as really sad. And I think it's the result of social media and the fact that because we spend so much of our lives on social media, we're constantly broadcasting our views to everybody else, and it just creates this friction. Whereas back in my day, in the early, when I was in my 20s, in the early 2000s, we weren't on social media. We were at the pub, and so we formed deep bonds with people, and like politics didn't even come into it.
What would you say to get deeper into that? How to, even for me, because I'm struggling. If people have a different political view, I'm like, my instant reaction is just like, well, screw you then. It's like I do to others what they do to me.
Yeah.
I want to know, how can we foster unity with people we disagree with?
I think a great way is to do stuff in the real world. So like get offline. And I mean, it's a bit rich for me to say that because I have an online business. I get that. But doing things in the real world, doing things like having a picnic, going to the pub. Like, I actually think going to the pub and drinking with your mates is a healthier option than just sitting online talking to them on social media. Like, real face-to-face interaction gives us all sorts of psychological rewards, and it's healthy. It's good for us to, just talk to someone face to face and see their facial expressions and their body language. But just, so much of this interaction we're doing online, we're missing the body language, we're missing the smiles, we're missing the laughter. And it's too easy to just dismiss someone because of their politics, right? But like, if you were talking to them face to face, there would be a human connection there that we're not getting just through the phone or just through the desktop.
And I also want to ask, is it important to how can we stay nuanced when there isn't much nuance out there? Like you would say you're nuanced, but I mean, we like to think of ourselves as open-minded, right? But why is it important to be nuanced, and how do we do that with all the information that we're bombarded with today?
Well, it's important because the world is nuanced, right? And the world is vastly more complicated and complex than our political theories allow. And so, one of the hallmarks of ideologies is to simplify reality. And whenever we have a narrative that is very simple or, simplistic, we can be sure that we're reducing some of the complexity of the world, and it's probably not going to be helpful for us. So that's one thing. The other thing, how do we develop a more nuanced perspective? Well, we do that through reading and observation. So there's plenty of books out there. Libraries still exist. I recommend people get a library card. There's lots of classic literature. Best genre is probably history. So much of what is happening today has happened before in past cultures, past civilizations. So it's very useful to have like a broad understanding of history to get a proper context for what's going on today.
But we naturally don't want to do that. We naturally want to, it's our instinct to be tribal and go to the extreme. And I suppose that is probably quite a big question, how to counteract that natural.
Go to the pub, go to the library.
So now say it to the camera.
Go to the pub, go to the library.
I suppose, are you worried about the sort of trajectory of the current culture and where we're going?
Yes and no. So I think the trend lines are pretty bad, and Jonathan Haidt is doing excellent work on this, and he's showing that since the advent of the iPhone, and since the phone became ubiquitous, all sorts of trend lines for young people have gotten really dire. So more and more young people are anxious and depressed, more can't find any meaning in life. Girls in particular, their mental health has fallen off a cliff. So this is since around 2009, when the iPhone basically became ubiquitous in society. So he's marshaled all of this evidence for the hypothesis that phones and social media apps on phones in particular have basically created a mental health epidemic, a poor mental health epidemic among the youth, not just of America, but of in Australia, in the UK. And he's leading a campaign to get rid of phones from childhood, protect childhood from phones basically and phone addiction. So he wants to get phones out of schools. He wants it to become a norm for people to not get social media until they're about 16. And I think basically everything he says is a good idea. And as a parent of a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, I really hope that his ideas get traction and pick up so that my kids have a longer childhood without the interference of phones and social media. I really hope that, because as soon as they get phones and as soon as they get social media, I know I'm going to be in for it and their mental health is going to suffer. So I think once our societies become more aware of how much harm and damage these apps and this tech is actually doing to us, and young people in particular, there will be more focus on how to solve these problems, and we might be able to get better maybe for the next generation.
Oh man, I hope so. I suppose I'll end with this. What values would you like to see elevated in our society for people to flourish?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, like a theme that we've discussed, treating people as individuals always goes a long way. Listening. So when you meet someone, don't see them as a representative of some group. Actually listen to what they say and get to know them as people and get to know their history. So much of who we are is shaped by what we've been through in the past. And so like getting to know people's stories is important. I think appreciating good art is something that our culture, we're still producing good art, but it'd be great if we produced more. And so that if we focus more on just appreciating art as art, not, focusing on what the political message of a film is or a book or so on and so forth. If we can just appreciate the aesthetic qualities or the, what goes into producing good works, and also just having more fun.
I totally agree. And I would also add to that, something I've been working on in the last year is being aware of my natural inclinations.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're tribal. Being aware of that. That I naturally want to us and them. It's natural.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, self-awareness is hugely underrated. Yeah. But it's definitely a skill, and we could I could develop more self-awareness, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally. Oh, it's been so great to have you. Thanks you so much.
Me. Yeah.
Claire Lehmann.
Thanks for having me, Melody. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you.